Our YouTube, so we're back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and we are here again to talk about the cross, the wooden cross that we see at the end of episode intermission with the exact scene, of course, the infamous cross at this point. And obviously, we have talked about the cross before on this channel, probably a couple of times, but generally it's, in those cases, us talking about Zack as a whole, like, is he alive, is he dead, what's going on with him, the people in the church, the Sector 7 plate missing, the cross in the church, of course, and stuff like that. Like, we never really just done a video focused on just this cross, which is what I want to talk about and go a little bit deeper in on it. Actually, I've been wanting to talk about it for a while. I've had a draft tweet thing saved on my Twitter for a bit, just haven't tweeted it out. And I figured, hey, let's actually talk about this. Let's discuss it. Because I did see some time ago some people talking about just kind of the Zack scene as a whole, and essentially chalking up the lack of the wooden cross in Remake as everybody's favorite word. Let's say it together. It's a dev error. That's what everybody says about everything. Now, my personal opinion on that is that I think it's just kind of ridiculous. I think a lot of times when people can't explain something or don't have a good idea for it, it's a dev error. Just like we talked about with like the goddamn, the different Midgar, right? The Midgar that we see during the Zack scene that then popped up in First Soldier, but then also has now popped up, at least with the art that we have, the key art we have for Crisis Core Union. We've seen these differently designed Midgars in 3 separate games, but I've been told by people that they think it's a dev error. And I think that at a certain point, when is it no longer a dev error, right? The wooden cross that we see during Zack's segment of episode intermission is a constant staple throughout the entirety of the Final Fantasy VII compilation, going back as far as the original FF7 for 24, almost 25 years. If it's in Crisis Core Union, it'll be 25 years. Episode intermission came out last year, so 24 years. So for 24 years, we'll say for now, this wooden cross has been a constant staple of that church, except for Remake. This wooden cross is literally all over the compilation. It's in the original Final Fantasy VII. It's in prequel stuff like Crisis Core. It's also in sequel stuff like Advent Children. It's also in key art for the original FF7, but also it's in key art for FF7 Remake. It was actually a part of multiple key arts when it comes to FF7 Remake. It was even a part of the 30th anniversary exhibition that they did for the Final Fantasy series itself 5 years ago. It even appears in obscure shit like Final Fantasy Airborne Brigade, whatever the hell that was. The point of bringing this all up is that, as you can see, this is a constant thing throughout every bit of FF7 until we got to Remake. And it is still technically a part of Remake. It's just a part of a DLC for the game. But in base game Remake, it's not there. But it's been in every goddamn thing else. Hell, they redesigned the motherfucking Buster Sword, the iconic weapon from FF7, within the compilation before they decided, hey, maybe we shouldn't use this cross anymore. What's kind of crazy to me, too, is that people that deny shit like this that we talk about are the same people that'll talk about the most minute details for like 30 minutes, right? Like, there's what is that speck of dust on Sephiroth's ball sack? What does that mean? How does it impact the story? Like, little tiny details that don't really amount to anything in terms of like impacting the story, whereas what we're talking about here, this lack of a wooden cross, assuming that it's not a dev error, which obviously could be, that is a possibility. I never write anything off 100% on the channel. We don't have caveman brains here. But that cross not being there and assuming that that is intentional by the developers has massive implications because, as we just looked at earlier, like, it's supposed to be there. We're playing the FF7 story. It's supposed to be there during that, before the FF7 story, after the FF7 story, and everything in goddamn between. Another reason why I don't believe that it's like an oversight by the developers is that back whenever Remake dropped in 2020, let's assume that the wooden cross was supposed to be there, right? They forgot it, whatever the case. But whenever they dropped the PS5 version, they would have retroactively added it in there if it was supposed to be in there. Just like they added brand new shit to the PS5 version, right? New lighting effects, new fog effects, shit that did not exist with Remake. It wasn't just an upscale of graphics to the PS5 version. They added brand new shit to the world. And if there was supposed to be a wooden cross in that church, they would have fucking put it there. And if for some reason it was like an Unreal Engine issue similar to the door stuff that we've seen in Remake, I'm sure they would have resolved that as well when they released it on the PS5. The other thing for me too on why I don't think it's like a fucked up asset is that the wooden cross itself doesn't look like it does in Remake, where Remake it looks like it was one single piece that was mounted to the wall that maybe got taken down or something, right? That's kind of what it looks like when you're looking at it in Remake. Whereas the actual cross itself is like multi-layered, right? There's 3 different pieces of wood. The piece of wood that's going up and down would be like the furthest back piece. That'd be the one that's actually touching the wall. The second one would be the one that's going bottom left to top right. And the one that's in the front is the one that's going bottom right to top left. There's clearly 3 different pieces of wood here, right? When you go to Remake, it's not just like this messed up asset that they forgot to make a wood cross. It's just a stone cross. There's nothing there. That's the point. I've shown you a couple screenshots from in-game on the PS5 version of the game, and it's a flat wall, right? Like, again, we call it a stone cross all the time because that's just what it looks like, but it's not even a cross at all. There's nothing there. It's almost like it was like a mount for the cross, and then like somebody took it down, or maybe as time's gone on, the wood rotted or something. I don't know. Like, it looked like there was something there at one point, but no longer is. But it's very intentional too, right? Because people talk about it being like a fucked up asset, But like the shape of the cross that you're seeing on the wall, it matches all the other stone around it, right? It's the same color and it's the same texture. Something else I find just a little bit interesting when it comes to the conversation when we're talking about this stuff is that nobody even really noticed this until we got episode intermission, right? Like Remake was out for a whole year, and like this was never really like a big thing. There might have been some people that noticed it, some people that talked about it, but it wasn't really in like the public conscience of the community, right? Until we got episode intermission, where the Zack scene put intentional focus on the wooden cross, right? Like you can look at this scene right here. You can say what you want to about any other aspect of this ending. They are intentionally making you look at that motherfucking cross in this scene right here. Like the cinematography of this scene makes you look at the cross. The forced perspective, Zack's blurred, the background is highly defined, but like the angle, the cross is more or less right in the middle. Like I just don't know how you could look at this and not think that there's a purpose or a reason for why it's missing Remake. And again, if you look at the cross in this scene, you can tell that it's multiple pieces of wood. Now look, we could keep talking about this, but the point of this video isn't just to like prove the existence or the lack thereof, I suppose, of the cross when it comes to Remake. I think the majority of people out there think that there is a purpose to it. But the implications are massive, right? This could be a bunch of different things. It could be simply a different time thing, like with Remake. Maybe within Remake, for whatever reason, it's taken down by the time the FF7 story is happening, and obviously a lot of Zack stuff should be taking place in the past, so maybe that's why the cross is still there, it just hasn't been taken down yet. But again, as we talked about previously in the video, if we're using the compilation as a baseline, it should be there. That's kind of the whole point, right? Because they're in FF7, but it's also there in prequel stuff and sequel stuff. As far as like Advent Children, which is like 2 years after the FF7 story, the cross is still there. So it should be there Remake. That's kind of the whole thing here. But of course, that's sort of on the smaller end of stuff, because we're just talking about like a little bit of like time misdirection, right? Zack's in the past, Remake's in present. That's why the cross isn't there. But what the other implications could be are, of course, massive, because what the popular theory was back whenever we were first talking about the wooden cross was different timelines. This boiled down to the fact that, of course, the wooden cross is in Zack's world. The cross that we've seen through all of the compilation, this continuity between all the different games and stories and stuff, we've seen the wooden cross in this church, but it's not in Remake, which would imply that maybe they're different timelines. Maybe Remake's taking place in like a separate timeline from the original Final Fantasy VII continuity. There's also like the OG Midgar kind of inside the Singularity. There's technically 3 Midgars, but that's not the point of this video, right? We're just talking about, for the sake of this conversation here with the 2 different crosses, there's the Midgar inside the Singularity. There was kind of a blend of Remake's Midgar, but also OG's Midgar, because it had like the dark kanji symbol boxes or whatever on the reactors, but also like the outer upper plate areas didn't have any kind of buildings on them, which obviously Remakes does. And of course, when it comes to the original FF7, there was no buildings or anything on the outskirts of the upper plate. So the idea was essentially that maybe inside the Singularity is OG FF7's Midgar. And the fact that we don't see the wooden cross until after we do the Singularity shit, defeat the Whisper Harbinger, and we see the wooden cross with Zack's stuff, the implication being that maybe Zack is in OG FF7's timeline and our group is in a different timeline. And now these days I'm not necessarily the biggest believer of the multiple timeline stuff, but it could be happening, right? Again, I don't write anything off 100%. It kind of makes sense, though, when you think about it, given that, Remake is FF7, but different, right? And the fact that the Whispers are trying to sort of replicate the FF7 story, it's almost like they have FF7 original trapped in, like, the Singularity or some shit. It's, like, kind of weird, right? Like, the fact that they're trying to replicate it, there's a destiny, there's a fate, they already know what's going to happen, it's predetermined, they've seen it before, whatever the case, right? It just seems like some signs point towards, like, FF7's original continuity still existing within Remake in some way, like, separate from the Remake story. And of course, given what our last video was, where we talked about like time travel and put a lot of focus on the Singularity inside of Remake, this is all entirely possible given what a Singularity is. And I can't break it all down here because there's like a fucking 18-minute video or some shit. And the other idea here is that the altered timeline stuff, which is the more popular idea that I hear these days, which I do think makes a lot of sense, given that we see some changes already happening once Zack survives. Right? We see the different chip bag, the differently designed Midgar. And then once we got episode intermission like a year later, of course, we see the wooden cross inside the church. So those are a couple different changes from what Remake had. My only sort of problem with this idea is that, from what we can tell, the wooden cross is indicative of like the FF7 compilation, right? Before Remake, even though Remake's technically a part of it, the wooden cross is there all throughout everything except Remake. So I don't know why altering or changing like the past or the history of the planet, whatever the case, would then put a wooden cross in there, unless it's an altered timeline that just so happens to also have a wooden cross. I guess that could be the thing. And look, I'm not even like the biggest fan of the multiple timeline idea, but I think they could do some cool shit if there's like this alt timeline out there that's like the original FF7, because we do know that there's seems to be like multiple versions of our characters, right? At least Cloud could be other versions of the other characters that are inside the Singularity. But if we assume that there is another timeline out there that is supposed to be the original FF7, and we have other versions of our characters, right? I think it'd be pretty fucking cool if they brought in the old cast, even if I'm not a big fan of them. I practically hate Steve Burton's Cloud. But if there's an alt timeline out there, alternate version of Cloud, and he gets to voice him or something, I'd probably mark the fuck out. I might actually get emotional off that. I realize this has nothing to do with like the premise of the video itself, but we're talking about the alternate timeline potential and OGFF7 timeline potential stuff. So I just thought we'd throw that out there because I've been thinking about that for a while. Just didn't know if I wanted to tweet it or talk about it in a video. So here we are. But back on topic, when it comes to the different cross situation, again, the implications could be a lot of different things. It could be one of the three that we talked about, just Zack's taking place in the past, so that's why the cross is there and it's not in remake stuff. Maybe for the continuity going forward with remake, the cross isn't there for some reason. They got taken down, got destroyed, whatever the case. Or it could be alternate timeline stuff, or it could be altered timeline stuff. But it could be none of those, right? It could be something else entirely. Because as much as we all like to talk about and break down theories and discuss this shit, we could all be absolutely wrong with whatever's happening with remake, right? It could be something completely different. And then, of course, I guess technically it could be a dev error, but I think I made my thoughts pretty clear on that topic with this video, so I don't think we need to reiterate that stuff. But for me, it just doesn't make sense. There's nothing that points towards this being like some error on the developers. The fact that they've incorporated this cross into the entire compilation and outside of the compilation for 25 years now almost. But actually, speaking of 25 years and Crisis Core Reunion dropping later this year, we talk about whether or not that's actually going to be a one-to-one, remake or whatever the case, remaster, and whether or not there's going to be new stuff in it. And the thing is, they could keep it 100% the same, but just add new little details to the world that kind of like make it be a part of the remake continuity, right? And one of them being, we talked about maybe they put posters up around the world that have like the stamp logo. And it doesn't have to be a poster, it could be graffiti, whatever the case, but if we're seeing the stamp logo throughout Crisis Core Reunion, what it is going to matter too. Whether it's the Beagle or the Terrier, it's going to give us a lot of information. And I don't think that's an impossibility just because we know that they're remaking and redoing like every single asset in the game. And I believe it was noticed by somebody that in one of the trailers, like in the background, you can see like posters or something on the wall that were like posters that were from Remake but weren't actually in the original Crisis Core. So I think we already have confirmation of them adding new assets to the world. But imagine if we're playing Crisis Core Reunion and we get to the part of the game where Zack falls down into the church and meets Aerith very much like Cloud did. I guess technically Cloud was copying Zack in that moment. And we get up and there's no fucking wooden cross on the wall. I think it'd be awesome because I, for one, already think that there's a purpose to the lack of a wooden cross when it comes to Remake, but that also directly connected to Remake, which is what they talk about wanting to do with Crisis Core Reunion. That's why they gave it the subtitle Reunion. They say that they haven't changed the story at all, but you could, again, change assets in the world that make it kind of connect to the Remake overall story. It'd be like a bit of misdirection, right? Like, because they're saying we haven't changed anything to the story at all, and they wouldn't be lying, but they have maybe changed aspects to the game and the world that make it directly connect to it. And while I'm a firm believer in what I've said in the past, and I still believe this, that they don't have to do anything different when it comes to Crisis Core Reunion to connect it to Remake, because it still works with the Remake ending. I wouldn't mind them adding new stuff to it to make it kind of a newer experience, but also more directly connected to Remake, as in the lack of wooden cross, stamp posters, or whatever the case. But my dudes, I think that's where we're going to start to wrap up the video. So we're a couple months away from Crisis Core Reunion. We're also a year and a couple months away from when Rebirth's supposed to release, barring any delays. And it's been about, a year and like 3 to 4 months since Intermission first dropped. So currently, what are your thoughts on the cross situation? Because I think there is a purpose to it. I think the perspective they give you at the end over Zack's shoulder, Zack's out of focus, the background's very much in focus. They're making you look at that cross. I think there's a purpose to it. But my dudes, that's going to be the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, give a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you guys are new today. More Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on notifications, follow me on Twitter, @YT. I'm a Discord. Links to those networks are in the description. Into the outro. Later, guys. I don't know why I whispered that.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.